Hello, art historians. Today we're going to continue our study of early Europe, and we're going to move on to early Europe 4, but I just wanted to review where we've been. We've done early Europe 1 already, Catacombs of Priscilla, Santa Sabina, and this Vienna Genesis. We've done San Vitale, Hagia Sophia, the Theotokos, which is the Virgin and the baby Jesus, and the medieval looped fibulae. We've done the Lindisfarne Gospels, the Röntgen Pietà, and the Golden Haggadah. The last video we did was Islamic art of Europe. And remember, we're talking about Islamic art of Europe, so we're looking at Spain predominantly, and realizing that we're going to be doing a lot of Islamic art when we do West and Central Europe, West and Central Asia. So this was Islamic art of Europe. Today, we're going to continue with our next section of art history, where we're going to be looking at Romanesque art. Romanesque art is the art of buildings prior to the Gothic era. And when we're talking about Romanesque art, often I try to remind students that when you look even at the word Romanesque, there's lots of round shapes here. And that's sort of the idea of Romanesque as an art style, that Romanesque is just pretty round. It's a lot of stuff that is churches and things like that, but we're not dealing with a lot of those really sharp, pointy angles that we think about when we think about churches. We're also thinking that this is a lot of the time around the Crusades. We're dealing with a society that was hugely driven by patronage, where people would pay to have things created. Even the church would pay to have things created. Cathedrals in the Romanesque period were really important, and we begin to see a lot of construction of stone because wood burns very quickly. So the use of stone as a creative element really helps because it is less likely to catch fire. We're also going to see a bunch of different kinds of arches and a bunch of different kinds of windows and a bunch of different areas of the church that you're going to have to know sort of church vocabulary. But let's get going. Here we go. This is the Church of Sainte-Foy. That is how you say that, in Conques, France. This is Romanesque, and you have a couple of things. You have 4 images here. One of your images is the church, which was built from 1050 to 1130, and we'll talk about that. Then you have a reliquary, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is from the 9th century, so the 800s with later additions. The architecture is made out of stone. There's a piece of the church called the tympanum that is made of stone and paint. And then the reliquary itself is gold and silver and gemstones and enamel over wood. So when we first look at this, I want you to think that, Ms. Harmon, you said it's not pointy. Okay, you got a little bit of a point here, but look at this arch here. It's round, all these round windows. This is round, these little round arches up here, this little round area above the door. Romanesque has a lot of these really round areas. And so that's one of the things that we're going to sort of think about when we think about churches. So I'm going to go ahead. You can pause, obviously, if you need to write these things down. But I'm going to go ahead to our second image. So this is from the street. You can see, where the people are. There's the doors. It's a large building, and it is in the middle of a town. And so you can see these are medieval ruins, and here is the church. This was in the middle of town. Okay. So let's come in a little closer to it. So the exterior length of the church is 191 feet. So we're dealing with a long church. The interior length of the church is 184 feet. We have some setbacks, where there's like a portico at the front. Then we deal with transepts. Okay, and this is an important concept. A transept is What makes a church into a shape of a cross? We're used to seeing churches being long buildings. That's how we've been looking at them in the churches that we've seen, Christian churches that we've seen, that we've studied so far. They're just long buildings based on the ancient Roman basilica. When we get into the Romanesque period, we begin to add a cross piece at the front near the altar that makes a church look like it's in the sign of the cross. And that cross piece is called the transept. That thing that makes a church look like a cross, the Christian symbol of Christ, instead of just a long, narrow thing, that's the transept. And so we'll look at that in a second. What's really cool is the height of the crossing, where that cross happens. It's 87 feet tall. So you deal with, a really beautiful soaring roof line inside this church. And the interior of the church, with the exception of that crossing, is 68 feet. So when we talk about this, we're looking at a lot of really important things that are going on with this church. We're dealing with Romanesque because it's influenced by the Romans. So we do see columns, but we do see a lot of arches because the Romans were big on arches because they invented concrete and they were able to do that. So Conques, that's the name of the city. Conques became a pilgrimage site. And the reason that happened is what churches tried to do was they tried to acquire relics. And early on, you could not build a Catholic church without possessing a holy relic. And this is a little more controversial in today's church thinking. But then a relic was, you would have the bone of a saint. So you might have, the leg bone of Saint Matthias. You might have the arm bone of Saint Andrew. And so what happened here is the city of Conques was able to get possession of a holy relic of Sainte Foy. And so when they got their holy relic of Sainte Foy, it became, the church became a pilgrimage site. People would go from one church to the next church to the next church to pray and worship. And so what you're looking at here is one of the stops on an important pilgrimage. And it's an important pilgrimage route called the Camino, or the Santiago de Compostela. And I'm going to go to the next slide really quickly. So this is where you end up in at the edge of Spain. And then here are your stops along the various routes that you could take to get to this area, this Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And this was a pilgrimage walk. So if you wanted to start here at Lucin, you'd go by Lyon, and you'd come down here, and you'd go through Conques, and you'd come down here, and then you'd come into Spain, and you would do this. Up here is Paris, where you would go to if you would come up here through Brussels, you'd come down through here. You might go to Amiens. You would go to the Notre Dame de Paris, then you would go to Chartres, Tours, Poitiers, then you'd come down along the coast of France and into Spain. So these are really important pilgrimage routes. And there are still people that walk this Camino, the Santiago de Compostela. There are still people that make these pilgrimages now. So this was a really big deal. Sainte Foy was a child who was, she was about to be married off to a pagan, and she refused to be married to a pagan because she was a Christian, and she was killed for refusing to marry in 1303. And so they get this I said 1303, 303. Sorry, I'm adding numbers where there are one. And so they get her her skull bone. It's really gross. They get her skull bone and they build this thing for it, and a reliquary, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And they make this one of the stops on the pilgrimage site. So let's go back to our earlier ones. So here we are, church from this date, reliquary from the 800s. Okay. And then we look at all these things, and I talked about transepts. So now I'm going to go here. This is a transept. So when you look at this is what we're used to seeing when we do basilicas, right? A rectangle with a curved piece at the end. That's what we're used to seeing. In the Romanesque period, they add this cross piece that when you look at it from above, it looks like a cross. Okay, so this cross piece is called the transept. Okay, so this is the transept. This is where you have to learn some of your church vocabulary, and it's really, really, really super, super, super important. The nave is where the people sit. The transept is the cross part. The apse, we learned this when we did San Vitale. The apse is where the altar sits. Then here are two more. Ambulatory, it's where how you move. You can walk behind the altar and go to these little teeny tiny chapels that are behind the altar. So there's little bloops on the back of the on the back of the church. Those are called radiating chapels. So this has an altar in it to serve mass for all of the people. But these also have little teeny tiny altars in it if you're having mass for just one or two people. Okay. So nave is where the people sit. Transept is the crosspiece. Apse is where the altar is. Ambulatory is where you walk behind. And then these little bloops are called radiating chapels because they radiate out from the ambulatory. Now, when you look at San Vitale, it looks almost fortress-like, and that is because we're dealing with, the idea of we're having, it's crusades and attacks and invasions, and so we build our churches in the same way that we would build a fortress. And so it has very serious, major, strong masonry and construction because it was built the same way that you would build like I said, a fortress. Okay, so let's go to the next. Let's go in here. We looked at this. Okay, let's look inside. So when you look inside, you're going to see that it's giant. Look how high the sky is, how high the ceiling is. And you have these arches, and this is called a barrel vault because it's round and it looks like a barrel. So it's a barrel vault. Okay. And that's this little arch right here. And then this high area right here with so much light, that's this tower right here over the transept. So here you see the long part, and there across, and here's that transept. So you get lots of light coming in right above the altar. Okay, this is where people sit. That's called the nave. There's the altar. Okay. Now, when we're looking at this, we're looking at the fact that we're beginning to see stone roofs. And we have to figure out how to build a really heavy stone roof. And so we look to the Romans because the Romans built a lot of stuff out of stone. And we realized that these vaults, these rounded arches here, help us distribute the weight. And so we use these vaults in the ceiling to distribute the weight of the roof. And that weight comes down onto these pillars and then down this arch and down into the floor. So we use these vaults in the ceiling. They're called barrel vaults, one more time, to support the weight of the stone roof. It requires a lot of skill, and there are a lot of columns in this in this church, as you can see, lots of big columns, little columns. And this is, again, to appropriately distribute the weight. They're very decorated. You can see that there's all these cool decorations. And they are decorated with pictures of saints and knights and important people from early Bible stories. the idea of good and evil. You can see that here. This is people being, this is the devil, and this is the mouth of hell, and this is bad people being shoved into the mouth of hell. So, I mean, this really is a church about, you know, it's light and airy inside, but it's also got a purpose, which is to make sure that make sure that you're being good, so that you won't go to the bad place. Um, so. Let's see, what do I want to talk about next? Let's talk a little bit more about, you can see that it's in the middle of the town there. I talked to you about it. And when we talked about that, it was, that it is on that Santiago de Compostela. And it's a huge space. And the reason it's a huge space is all these pilgrims were taking these pilgrimages to go to these holy areas, and they would travel in these huge groups to these very holy churches. And so you had to have a church big enough for all of these people to come when the pilgrims would come. And then why would churches care whether all these pilgrims came? Because when pilgrims would walk the Santiago de Compostela and the Camino, they would leave offerings at the churches. And so it was a really good way for people who had the time to go on a pilgrimage to go. It was a way for the churches to benefit and continue to build for the pilgrims, because they would be able to get the donations from the pilgrims and to build bigger churches. This eventually leads to, as we get further and further into the time of the church, it eventually leads to monetary corruption, and it becomes really, really bad. But at the beginning, it was sort of a good, an exchange there of pilgrims would come and worship, they would donate money to the church, and the church would add more facilities to be able to bring more pilgrims in. Okay, let's talk about it. So we see lots of light here, lots of windows, lots of to be able to make it look light and airy and shiny. And it looks very much like a Roman basilica, with the exception of the fact that it's got that transept, that cross arm that goes across. Now, let's look at some of the most common decorations on a Romanesque cathedral. We'll go to this next one. And this is called the tympanum, okay? Tympanum, right there. Tympanum. What the heck is a tympanum? Well, let me back up some. Okay, see it right there? Oops, see it? Tympanum is when you make that little arch above the two doors that you enter through. It is that sort of arched triangular half moon area above the doors, and it tells a story. That's what a tympanum is. So here's the tympanum, and you can see the door frame, right? Here's the tympanum. So it's 22 feet wide. So from here to here, we're looking at 22 feet wide, and it's 12 feet high. So from here to here, you're looking at 12 feet. And what it does is it's huge, so that it can tell the story of, what you're looking at and who is who. So here in the center, you have Christ the King sitting there as the judge. And this is called a last judgment. Okay, and this is not the last example of a last judgment we will see. We saw the last judgment of Hunefer. That is the Egyptian version of this. This is the Christian version of the last judgment, which is at the end of time, Christ will judge everyone and decide who goes to hell and who goes to heaven. Okay, and so when we see a last judgment scene like this, we usually see Christ seated, and he is serving in the role as judge. Okay, and so here we have Christ in the center, surrounded by the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, then we also have this is the Virgin Mary right here. Okay, so we see her right here. This right here, little girl right here, that's Saint Foy. That is her. Okay. This is also her after she's been martyred. All right. So this is the Archangel Michael right here. This is the Archangel Michael and one of the devils fighting over who is going to go to hell. This is the heaven area, and this is the hell area. And here you see the devil sitting as the king of hell, and here's the devil again shoving people into the mouth of hell. So this is Michael the Archangel deciding who is good and who is bad with the help of Christ. Okay, so it's a really, really cool picture. This was carved between 1107 and 1125. And he is dividing, Christ is acting as the judge, dividing the world into good and evil, heaven and hell. And with his right hand up in the air, he is welcoming those into heaven. And with his left hand pointed down, he is casting down the bad people into hell. And so, we see here Michael the Archangel, the defender of Christ. That's what his name is usually called in Christian text. And we see him here as the defender of heaven, and he's seated at Christ's feet, and he is basically weighing the souls of the dead. Were you good or were you bad? So it's definitely our connection to our study that we did of the Last Judgment of Hugh Nefer, because there's, again, that idea of weighing good versus evil. And so it's really important that you understand that when pilgrims would come into this church, they would go in through this door under the hell side and be reminded of what happens if they do bad things. Then they would go into the church and have mass, and then they would come out blessed out of the heaven door. And so it was a reminder that, you go in bad and you leave saved. The point of a pilgrimage is to earn your way into heaven by being faithful and good. And so that was the architecture here of the tympanum, reminding them at the end of the world, there will be a last judgment. And where do you want to be? Do you want to be on the right side of Christ and going into heaven, or the left side of Christ going down to hell? And the inscription at the bottom down here in Latin says, "O sinners, change your morals before you might face a cruel judgment." Dun, dun, dun. And so that's what we're looking at here. We got 124 distinct people here, and it would have been richly painted, much like we talk about the like the Acropolis and the Parthenon and all that stuff would have been painted. It would have been painted so you could see it a little better as you go in. The paint has come off, but we still have that. So the last piece here, your last image, is the reliquary. Okay. And here we go. So inside the reliquary is the skull bone of Sainte Foy. The name of the reliquary is Sainte Foy in Majesty. So here she is, being worshipped. And here you can see once a year on the festival of Sainte Foy, they take the box with the reliquary out and they take it through town so that everyone can see it. You can see that it's gold. There you can see the skull bone inside, and you can see that it's gold and it has all these jewels and stuff on it. So here is the College Board image that you can look at. Okay, so she's 2 feet 9 inches tall. Her theme is metalwork. It could also be reliquary. We have some of those too. And she was martyred for refusing to marry and to worship pagan gods. And so she was martyred in 303. The Church of Sainte Foy received or obtained her relic in the 800s, and they made this. And then as people would come and go to the chapel of Sainte Foy looking for miracles or looking to be saved in the next life, they would leave offerings for Sainte Foy. And that's where all these jewels and gems and things come from. If you were really wealthy, you might leave an emerald or a ruby or a sapphire or some other something. You might leave some gems or whatever, and they were continually added to the statue of Sainte Foy. Okay, and so that is the Church of Sainte Foy. Okay, and then we're going to do our second Romanesque piece, and that's all for Romanesque. This is the Bayeux Tapestry. And let's talk about it's another one of those ones where the language is a little weird. This is not a tapestry. A tapestry is technically where the design is woven into the piece on a loom. Okay. This is not really a tapestry because the whole white cloth was woven, and then the images were embroidered on top of the fabric. So it's really an embroidery, not a tapestry, but it's been called the Bayeux tapestry for so long that that's just what people call it now. Okay, but it's embroidery on linen. And this is really important. Romanesque Europe, English or Norman, and we're going to talk about that in a second, what that means. But we can see that it was begun in 1066, and we know that for a fact because 1066 is what is referred to as the Norman invasion. And that means that this was begun just after the war happened, and so it was really done in real time. And that is really cool. So what you're looking at is a piece of fabric that is 231 feet long. Yeah, 231 feet long. It is like wildly ginormous. And in it being 241 feet long, what you can see here is you can see a piece of it here, and it just continues down, 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 down. And then it turns a corner down there and comes all the way back up. So this is panel 38, panel 40, panel 42. Like, so this is giant, okay? And so what you're looking at is an embroidery that has the main image at the top, the main story that's happening, and little decorations also at the bottom that tell like some fairy tales. So it's told in Latin. So all of the language that you see, all of the words that you see are in Latin. It is the length of 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. It's huge. And what its story is it celebrates the William of Orange, okay? William the Conqueror, that's what he's known as, William the Norman. It celebrates William conquering England in what is called the Battle of Hastings. So let's watch how this takes. What happens? Let's story time. So the King of England was Edward the Confessor, and he dies. And when he dies, Harold takes over as king. Except William had been told that he would be the king when Edward the Confessor died. And when Edward the Confessor dies and William the Conqueror finds out that Harold has taken over, William gathers his forces together, readies himself for battle, gets his boats together because he's in France, gets his boats together and sets sail. And he comes over to England and fights with Harold and beats Harold and becomes the king, becomes the king of England, and also sort of unifies for a little while like France and England together. So this is called the Battle of Hastings or the Norman invasion. And this was commissioned, paid for, patron, by the Bishop of Bayeux, Bishop Odo, who was actually the brother of William the Conqueror. And so all of the designs were drawn out by men and then stitched by women. And what's really interesting is that the colors are not meant to be natural. They are non-natural in their manner. We have purple and blue horses. We have, like, it's just not meant to be, it's meant to be a little bit fanciful. And the reason that we use, odd fanciful colors is because the background is that neutral, like off-white linen. We're dealing with very flat figures. We don't have a lot of shading, shadowing, not a lot of perspective. There are 75 separate scenes and over 600 separate individuals that are in here. And it's told in these little pockets of story. What's awesome is that it's so current and when it was being created. It would be like starting a thing like this, the day after Pearl Harbor happened. It's meant to be instructive. It's meant to tell a good story. It's meant to preserve history. So you'll notice that this is not one of your images. This is why you don't have a star here. But let's go to the next page. So this is kind of being told like it's in a comic book, and I love this drawing of it. So you can see that we get these really beautiful ornate animals, sometimes up in the top, sometimes they have to do with the story, sometimes they don't. The body language of the person shows you where your eye should be. Like this person is pointing, so clearly that's what you need to be looking at. There is a contrast between the light and the dark, the character's eyes and their light skin. We get to see clothing that tells us whether they are British or Norman coming over with William the Conqueror. And we get to see their social status as well. We get the captions in Latin to tell us what's happening. Look there, you can even see it. It says William right there. We get environment, pieces of furniture, how they lived, stuff like that. We get the size of the character. Look, we get to see, look how big those legs are, because we're dealing with hierarchy of scale. We get these really cool ornamental dividers that are like not real things, that are meant to break up pieces of story into these little sections. Down here at the bottom, we get some informational ornaments about regular life and sports and what's going on. So you can see plowing and planting and like doing with crops. And then there is some white space here to emphasize the body motions of the person that's doing them. So this is sort of a cool explanation of how to understand the Bayeux tapestry. And then we get into your actual images. So this is the first one. This is called the First Feast. And this is the feast that they have before they go into battle. It's their meal as they're preparing to go into battle the next day. And I'm hoping you can identify which one of them is William. With hierarchy of scale. So you see this is a servant handing out chickens on a spit and handing out pieces of meat. And we have someone playing the horn, and we have drinking and eating. And then we have this guy who's so tall, his head is breaking through the top. That's William. Then we have these fantastical griffins and phoenixes and fantastical like characters. We have the really cool curved table so that they're trying a little bit of perspective, but it's not great. And it just shows us that the night before battle, William is, he's confident. He doesn't feel scared. He's having a battle. He's having some food. He's doing some drinking. And so this is one of your pictures. And then this is your other one. This is the actual battle scene. This is the charge against Harold by the cavalry. We see the dead at the bottom. Here's someone that's dead and his head is missing. Here's another dead person, some more dead people being, trampled by the horses. We have soldiers with axes and spears and things like that. But this is clearly the men on horseback, the Normans. William's people are clearly defeating Harold's people. And so that is what this is meant to do. It is meant to set up here, look at how successful we are, and yay, go us, go Normans and William, and boo to Harold, and Harold needs to not be king. And so that's really what it's kind of like. A comic book. It's kind of like propaganda. It's kind of like a storytelling. And that is the end of Romanesque. We have 2 Romanesque pieces, and that is where we are. We're going to move on to Gothic next time. So thanks for learning about Romanesque art with me, and I will see you next time.